Hello, low ego action heroes. It's Debbie Levitt from DeltaCX.com, and it is time for another fantastic podcast. Today is September 28, 2020, and we are up to episode 76, and this one is What is Service Design? And joining us today is a fantastic, super fun, super smart repeat guest, Elisa del Galdo, and I'm just going to bring her right in and have her introduce herself.
Hi, Deb. So those of you who may not know me, I've been around for quite a long time, about 3 decades, sort of working all over the world, basically running, doing UX design and research, and then running teams and creating teams. Run a number of teams out of London and from different organizations. Worked in lots and lots of different areas. Most recently, did primarily just pharma and healthcare, so kind of working in that space, but have worked in lots of different industries, done lots of different types of things. But today, Deb has asked us to kind of come on and talk about service design. So we're only going to spend about an hour doing that, but actually you could talk about it, forever. It's actually quite big, and there's, and as many people are talking about it, there are different opinions of what it is. So this is just, sort of from my opinion, and Deb and I will be talking about, what it is, how to do it, what are some of the tools and the methods that you use, how is that different really from UX, or how does UX really part of it? So I guess we can just, jump in because we've got lots of stuff to talk about.
Yes, and before we do, just a reminder to everybody watching live. First of all, thank you. You can ask your questions or add your comments in the LinkedIn chat, in the YouTube chat, and now I'm also monitoring any tweet that has hashtag DeltaCX, all as one word. So feel free to ask questions or throw comments there. And so back to you, Elisa. I find a lot of people will say, like, what's service design, and is that different from UX? Is it part of UX? What do you say?
So, like a lot of things, so last time we were talking, we talked a little bit about design thinking and like how, my impression was like when the people started talking about it, it's like, well, but that's what we were already doing. Service design is a little bit the same. So it has expanded out, and I think it's expanded out in a way that's much more collaborative, which is good. But actually, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, when I was sort of a, designer on the ground, we were looking at ecosystems, and so if you think about, not just this piece of software that someone's going to use, or not just this website, it's actually expanding it out and really understanding all the touch points, all the people, the material, the content, the processes that happen behind that, different types of software tools, anything that needs together. So back in the in the old days when we first started talking about ecosystems, we talked about front office and back office because we needed to know what was going on. I worked on a project which was really interesting because the research was so interesting when I was actually in the bourse in Paris, and they were telling me, well, the software is great, but my version, I can't actually see what the customer is seeing. So when they're talking to me about a problem, I can't see it. So it's about making all those connections and then actually delivering a product that has better outcomes. It's all about business goals, business objectives, and again, same thing, all about user and customer needs and requirements and the delivery of that. So that way, very similar to UX, very similar skills. The process, I would say, the backbone of the process is always pretty much the same. You start with research, discovery, you start looking at, it's very much the double diamond for those of people who are familiar with the double diamond, kind of understanding, coming up with ideas around solutions, identifying what those problems are you're trying to solve, and then going in more into the more design and evaluation phases. So in that way, it's very similar. But the artifacts you create are different. Well, they're not different. They're just a little bit bigger sometimes.
They're different
but they're different. But if you look at them, people design ecosystems for all sorts of things, that they're designing. So if you're doing, a website, is a sitemap an ecosystem of your website? So they all have different types of names. And I would say if you're going into service design, there'll be lots of different people, lots of different books that tell you about all the different types of artifacts. A lot of them just have different names and are basically the same thing. Some of them are different. But what you will find is that for your situation, you may have to adjust them or kind of adapt them to what you need. Because what's most important is that, like everything else in UX, you start with the research and the insight. And part of that research and the insight is also, this is maybe a little bit different from some people who are doing UX, but not so much in the kind of strategy end of UX, is that you need to understand what the proposition of the business is. How is it going to make money? Who's it going to deliver to? Who's my most important customer? Who am I trying to please? So understanding how that service works as a business. So that's slightly different than, say, what a UX designer might be responsible for. So it's looking at a more holistic view of whatever this service is.
It sounds like
Does that
that
make
no
sense?
matter what type of work you're doing, we should be looking at all of those angles as well. I know many of us want to be customer centric, but as I always say, you can't burn stakeholders at the stake. That's not why they're called stakeholders. We still have to take into consideration what the business is looking to do and try to merge the evil Venn diagram of what the customer needs and what the business is
Yeah,
trying to do.
yeah, yeah. The reason they're called stakeholders is they carry a big stick to beat you with when you get it wrong.
Does feel that way. Ow.
Sometimes it does. I think that, so I guess it'd be good to give a couple of examples of different types of service design because they look different. We've, done lots of different ones, but first thing I wanted to say that came into my head is, you need to be really thorough. So your research and insight will take you down a line. So you'll be talking to one person, they'll be saying, well, I use this piece of software, and that's because I deliver to this person, and he has something else, and then he has to do this before I do this. So anybody who's done sort of Gantt charts, maybe industrial engineering, that kind of stuff, logistics, it's that kind of thinking around how does everything mesh together at what point in time, what's critical, what happens before something else happens. So all that kind of thinking, but you need to get that out of your research. And the insight will be how it all should fit together or not, as the case may be, or how it's not fitting together. But what people require and need through that system. And that's something you should carry with you in just about, any project, but you're thinking it on a bigger scale and you're mapping it out on a bigger scale. So I'll start with something quite big and then we can talk about a couple other little smaller ones. So most recently I worked on a project that was for a pharma franchise, and what they had, and I won't mention any names, but what they had was a company that was just every year did them a massive PowerPoint deck of here's all the patient services and tools and stuff we're going to do this year. No research, no, they just kind of came up with it very much a marketing, creative marketing, company. Yeah, we're going to do one of these, we're going to do one of those because we did it last year and we did it. And then what was happening is that because this was done by sort of the central sort of corporate part of the franchise, the rest of the franchise all over the world wasn't particularly interested in what was happening at corporate because either it was very expensive for them to localize, they didn't even know it existed, it wasn't adequate for what their customers needed, they couldn't actually approve it in their countries because there was something wrong with it, and they also, because they have less funds as you get farther away from corporate in smaller countries, they have less funds to be able to pay to translate and localize things. So they won't do it unless they really, can see a good proposition for doing it, and there's a benefit for doing it. So we spent quite a long time. So we spent about probably close to a year just getting to the prototype designs, because we spent a lot of time, and you will find when you're doing service designs that are very internal, is there is the case study that says that this will have value because, it's kind of design it once and everybody can use it quite easily. So there was the issue about how is this service going to manage all of these um, patient services. So it was like a service around patient services. So this might get a little confusing. And so how are we going to have this on a platform that is actually a service? Is that service also going to allow us to recognize through analytics which ones are being used, which are effective, which are driving sales, so that we can retire the ones that aren't performing because they couldn't tell if they weren't performing. Also, when other people want to sort of take them off the shelf, every country has to put them in a condition to localize them. So a part of the process in the service was about how each one of those patient services that was delivered fits into the service in a localization package. So it was like what we call localization toolkit. So it was how everything slotted into the platform. So another country could take it, localize it, but not have to do that. So kind of now you can see how the composition work starts to become financially more viable. These countries pay less, and it's just being done once. And the other thing that was part of this service was for not only countries to be able to see a dashboard for each patient service about how it was performing in the countries where it was, also to see where it's been approved, because they know if it's approved in one country that's similar to them and has similar laws, then it's easy for them to get it approved. But also see how it's performing. So if it's not performing, so if Italy looks at what France has done and it's not performing in France, they might kind of think, well, if it's not performing in France, it's maybe not likely to perform here, where if it wasn't performing in China, that might not be an issue because the cultures are so different. So it was really about managing this influx every year of about 50 different services and also sort of cutting them down, because in order to sit on the platform, the service was actually forcing their vendors to actually demonstrate by evaluating them that they had an outcome, so a beneficial outcome. So the whole service was kind of managed around that. So when we created it, having done hours and hours and hours of research, we mapped it all out on a wall. So basically we had a room, we had a whole room because it was so big, and to be honest, it wasn't big enough. And so what you start doing in this case, we started making kind of swim lanes of all the actors, who's doing what at what point in the time. So from the very, start of the commissioning, this year we're going to do patient services, right down to how does this happen, and how does everybody interact along that process.
And quickly, a couple of questions just so I can understand and everyone else can understand. First of all, does that artifact have a name? And second of all, is this the current experience or is this the optimized experience?
So this is the experience. We tried to optimize the experience in the way we were designing. And what that thing on the wall, which was basically a lot of post-it notes because it was all dissecting all the insight, that becomes a blueprint. So that obviously becomes an art that is, professionally done and, rendered, with a piece of software. So you look to design the optimal, but what we then did is we backed that up with a roadmap. And that roadmap showed, here's the optimal that we want, but also kind of broke it down and, okay, this is what we're going to do first. This is what we're going to do second. Because with this system, we had existing pieces of software that we had to replace or bring in. So there was also a lot of technical complexities behind what was happening. So there were third-party systems that were running, that were managing the approvals and medical and legal regulation approvals. But what we found, so this is interesting. So we had a lot of stakeholders because they were all over the world. But what we found was, the blueprint is really valuable for us as designers to understand how to design and also understand how to create that roadmap. So, do we absolutely have to do first? What second? How can we get 80% in 20% of the work? But what we didn't do in the beginning, which we very quickly learned, is we didn't do a storyboard. So we did the blueprint and then realized that no one really understood what we were talking about, except the more technical people on the ground who were actually doing the work. So the level above stakeholders didn't understand. So we actually went a little bit backwards and did a whole storyboard for them so they could understand the value of what we were doing. And that helped immensely, because the director of the franchise within, it's a franchise within a big pharma company, he's a scientist. he doesn't understand any of this stuff. He's a very smart man, but doesn't understand any of this stuff. And when we gave him the storyboard, he just kind of said to us, like, oh my goodness, now I can actually talk to people about this. Now I know what this is. And so, he had his people who were part of the digital, who was telling him this was the really good thing to do and this was great, but he didn't really understand it. So that storyboard, and in other cases, we normally do them quite early, but we didn't because we had so much other stuff to do. But that was a misstep, so we had to go back and do that. And then from there, we used the blueprint and the storyboard to then confirm and sort of nudge it all along to then create the roadmap. That was very complicated, partly because of all these legacy systems, but it looked at everybody, everything, every piece of software. It became quite large.
And people can Google service design blueprint for examples of what some of these documents look like.
So I wrote down some tools because I thought I would forget all the numbers. So I wrote them down as I was thinking of them. So there's things called a business model canvas. So that will help you kind of fill in the blanks about a business and make sure that you're actually, if you are creating a service around, this is a new business, that will help you kind of understand that. Ecosystem mapping, which I talked about before. Service feasibility blueprints, design blueprints, roadmaps, another one, service design canvas. I've heard them people call it journey canvas, which really is just journey mapping for those of us who customer journeys, a day in a life, depending on what the service is. So you actually map out someone's, life. You can again do things like profiles or personas, depending on how deep you need to go and how complex your actors are, because we refer to them as sort of actors. And again, the storyboards, what else do I have here? Customer lifecycle maps, which are quite interesting because it talks about, I bring a customer in and they're going to do all this stuff. And then when do they drop off? And when they're about to drop off, how do I intervene? So it's really kind of looking at how that service copes with that customer lifecycle.
A quick question on those are great. Thank you for that list. I hope everyone is Googling all of those. We do have a question in the chat room, but I have a quick question first. I just had a bizarre debate with someone in a live stream before this. What do you see as the difference between a persona and a user profile?
Complexity and depth.
Okay. Which one's more complex and how?
Okay, so your persona is more complex and it has more depth. So this is the way I kind of taught my teams, and my teams taught me.
I'm asking you.
Always a two-way street. Always a two-way street. So profiles to me are much more of a marketing kind of almost like a segmentation thing. You don't tend to have any affinity with them. So you don't actually, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't empathize with them when you are designing. The purpose of your persona and the way, I'm sure people do them all different ways, but the way I do them is that each one is not a real person. It's a conglomeration of attributes that make up a person, but it might be across several different people. So if you're working within a marketing organization, they really struggle with it, because they think that segments or profiles
Our
are
demographics.
personas.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're not. There are demographics in there, so the way you put them together, um, but it's a much more complex process, and it's much more about, you know, thinking, doing, feeling, needs, blocks,
Motivations,
barriers,
tasks.
how they motivate, yep, triggers, a day in a life. So it's bringing those people to life, because what you can't do is you cannot design for 10,000 people. Yeah. You can't design for 20 people. I mean, you could, but you'd be there for a long time trying to get it all right. So what that does is, people say, oh yeah, we got 15 personas. It's like, you can't design for 15 personas. You need to say that, like about 12 of them don't really matter, because you really sort of can get your head around three. But it's bringing all those people into a smaller number of people that you can design for. And the attributes across that population are then combined into people who sound and feel real, that you can empathize with. So you use them as a filter when you're making design decisions. So, okay, so, Mr. Brown is our, primary user, our persona for Mr. Brown. And then we have two others. We have, Ms. Red and Mr. Blue, and they're sort of secondary. So when you start making design decisions, like, is this good for Mr. Brown? Or is this just only good for the others? And so you kind of then start making your trade-offs about, if it doesn't do anything for anybody, you okay? Bless you.
I'm sneezing, but I was on
I know
mute.
you're sneezing.
Was I on
I
mute?
can see you sneezing. Yeah, you are on mute. I can see
Okay,
you
good. That was
sneezing
successful.
now. Yeah. So you kind of, it helps you filter those design decisions across these different types of people to understand, that's going to take me a little time to do in my design and in my build, but it's actually quite valuable to my secondary personas, and it won't harm the experience of my primary. So that's okay. But if it's the other way around, it's this process of kind of using all your artifacts to inform, to filter, to drive through, to really understand getting in your user's shoes. But your users are, hundreds and thousands of people, hopefully. And you can't do it like that. You have to do it kind of, this is a real person, but it's across a lot of other people. And profiles just don't give you that kind of depth.
And just a reminder to everybody that when you're making personas or any of these things, you are not allowed to guess. You are not allowed to make it up. This is all supposed to come from good qualitative research. I see way too often people guessing and making it up, or I see it used in a design thinking workshop and everyone gets to guess at the personas. Personas are not made from guesses. We'll be talking more about them next Monday. Please join for live lessons, how to make good personas. Let me take a quick break, and then we're going to get to the question that's been waiting so patiently. Thank you to the person who's been waiting. So since we do not have a sponsor, here is a 10-second video about my company.
Delta CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation.
And also a reminder, won't you please, to usability test the subscribe button over on YouTube. Make sure it works, turn it on, subscribe to us on the YouTube channel, and won't you please empathize with the like button. Touch it gently, with care, and put yourself in its shoes. Oh, are you muted?
No.
You're
Me?
back. Yeah,
No.
and
No, I'm here.
please like so that the YouTube algorithm knows that you enjoyed this video and should show it to more people. And I also want to remind everybody who's watching, don't forget, I know this covers my face, but don't forget that in December I'm going to be doing a live Acture workshop for 2 days, and everybody is invited. Follow the link deltacx.link/DEC for December 2020, and I usually charge $900 for my 2-day Acture workshop, and I am making it available to everybody for $60, 60. You will also get my video courses, so whether you want to join me live or you want to take the Acture video courses, this is the deal. So go start asking for the time off and join. You can we're doing it December, I think, 3 and 4, so you can sign up until December 2 if you need a little bit of time to get that manager approval. Okay, so back to service design. We had a question, which was, what is the typical composition of a service design team?
Okay, so this is one of those questions that has a "it depends" answer.
They all do.
Yeah, they all do. So, um, when, so the one I just described to you, so there was a core team, which was basically UX, and our key stakeholders with the client. So those were the people who were kind of driving digital services within the franchise. And so that was our team. And they understood digital to a certain extent, and they understood what it could do for them in terms of delivering stuff to patients, but they didn't really understand the whole back end bit. And then everybody else was sort of not secondary, but they were like the next layer out, because they were actually the people that we were delivering to in terms of services. So the ones that ran the little legacy software, and then the other ones who were actually in country. So the country businesses that were taking stuff. So that sort of, spread out different types of people. So there were marketing people, there were IT people, there were, sort of directors, there were, sort of people in charge of digital. So I have done other ones where, if you have logistics to think about, you'll have a logistics person. If you're doing manufacturing of some sort, then you have someone who understands manufacturing.
Security.
Security, yep. So yeah, so one of the ones that we did a while ago, so there was, we needed a psychiatrist, we needed someone who understood the technology around security and privacy. We needed a UX. There was a, sort of a UX side of it. Actually, there were two UX sides of it, but it was basically, kind of a research and a design side of it. But it was delivering a service that actually the collaboration team, and there were also people who understood about delivering mental health from a government perspective. So it became the shape of that team and that collaboration it's very much driven by what you're delivering. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I know in UX we're used to a somewhat typical team being kind of like product manager, project manager, some engineers. These are very often the people that we're collaborating with. It sounds like in the service design world that's much more expanded, because there's so many people that affect the inputs and outputs and outcomes that you really have to collaborate more with other partners.
Yeah. I mean, but part of what makes it a service design is how it touches there's so many different touch points. And the more touch points you have, then it's likely you have different sets of capabilities that you need, I think is probably the best way to do it. So the other one that we talked about before we came on, one of the ones was really around the stock photography industry. So very different, outside pharma. Where it turned into a service design. I actually went in to just help them redesign the interface for their keywording systems for stock imagery. This is a while ago now. It's probably about 10, it must be about 10 years ago. And so when I went in to do this, of course, I started with research, and I kind of started in the middle of the process. So keywording very quickly became clear that that was the middle of the process that they were running and the service that they were creating. And so it kind of went forward, to the people who were kind of selling or searching, which were outside customers or internal people selling to companies, imagery to companies, and then went sort of backward through sort of the marketing and the sales team and those that commissioned the photographers back to the photographers. And so it became very clear it was this service that was a cycle. And that cycle would change based on what they commissioned. And, so when you start getting all those people together, so someone's commissioning photography, and sometimes it's based on customer input, and sometimes it's based on, what's happening in the news. Yeah. So if, so now we can talk about Black Lives Matters or protests or things like that. So they will be their customers will be asking for photographs about those events, or it's, back to school now. So there'll be, new back to school imagery. If it's Christmas, it'll be more Christmas stuff. So that kind of flows through to commissioning then the photographers to do those imagery. And then it kind of got to the point where the photographs were delivered. People were evaluating whether they went in the system, not understanding why they were commissioned, so not understanding the keywords they commissioned. And then the ones that did get allowed through, and sometimes the ones that they actually wanted didn't go through because the people who were doing that didn't understand the first bit. But then they'd go through to keywording, and the people who were keywording didn't understand. There was no indication of what they were commissioned for. So the keywords didn't match the same terminology that was used to commission them, which is basically based on what your customers are telling them. So then it all kind of got lost. And then there were also things about retiring them, and who searches them and how you tag them. So there was all that kind of stuff, and who tags them, and how it all works. And that there were like images of different countries, so you really needed someone from that country to be able to tag those images. So there was a lot of work around who was doing what, when, and how it all connected together. But it all started with the insight from a research with about 3 people that expanded out to about 25. So
that escalated quickly.
Yeah, well, you had to get everybody in that circle. And it was quite interesting how they're like, oh yeah, no, we don't do that. We don't do that. So the foundation of what you're doing, there's always what we refer to as the UX, the customer research. But beyond that, there will be research about the proposition for the service. So what's the business case for this service? So with the one I talked about before, which was the pharma franchise, there was a very solid business case. We actually did some of the work for that before we started. But you need to understand, this is something, pretty much with everything you do anyway, what's the business proposition? What's the value to your client or the organization? And what's the value to the customer? Because if you don't have that, then it's nothing. So that's the kind of, thinking you have around, it's kind of, it's just bigger than sitting down and kind of just designing a website. You've got to think about more. Because by the time you've been commissioned to design a website, not that you're not going to do the research and do it, properly, but it's already been decided, and that whole strategy filters in. You don't have to do that. And there's probably not a lot of stuff going on in terms of delivering to lots of different people. So it becomes a little bit more compact. Where with service design, it's very spread out. And it moves and it changes. And the minute the competitor comes into the market, it changes again. So it's that kind of complexity that you might not have in, designing a mobile app.
That makes sense. Thanks for all that. I wanted to ask you, and I didn't ask you this earlier, so I might be surprising you with this, but do you have any recommended books or articles or people that you think are like super service design humans, or books that people should check out, especially if they're thinking about getting into this more?
Okay, I'm going to say something really controversial now. Lots of times I look at books and they're by big names, and many of these people I know, and they're not the best books.
I feel ya. I feel the same way very often.
And I think that, I knew you were going to ask me about books, and I've actually.
It's only because people always ask. They show up in the chat and they go, "Oh, I want to read more about service design. Whose book should I read?"
Yeah. So, but I don't actually have any service design books on my bookshelf, because the ones that I had at home I gave to my son, who is a UX practitioner, or I left them at my last job with the team, so they were in the library at my the last organization I worked with, and I know there were some that people liked, um, and there's lots of stuff online as well. But I think it's the best thing to do as a professional is look at a lot of different ways people are doing things, because your situation will never be exactly the same. And also there's a lot of dross out there as well. So and there's a lot of good stuff that's hidden. And I think that you have to kind of look at what's out there and go, well, this actually kind of fits what I'm trying to do, or this would work for the amount of time and budget I have, or the type of expertise I have, or the type of service it is. Um, so you really need to kind of dip in and out. I can ask some of my guys and my son as well what those books are, because I can't remember. I apologize. I thought they would be
They're
here,
so
but
good
they
we don't
disappeared.
remember them.
I know. Well, yeah. Um, but I think as well, if you can find someone, I mean, I think I had done a lot of service design, and when I did the big one for the franchise, which was huge, I had two other guys working for me, and we did it together. And I have to say, so we all kind of came from similar, all UX research and design, but came from slightly different backgrounds and, kind of, I guess, slightly different experiences. But when we came together, I learned a lot from them and about how they thought it looked. And I'm hoping they learned something from me, but maybe not. um, but you also learn a lot by collaborating with other people who may have done it in different ways. And my, I think you look and it's great, but you need to be able to assimilate that and use it. And lots of times, I think I have learned far more from some of the excellent people that I've worked with um, than out of books. And I say that having written books.
Yes, and I'm there with you. Do you have any recommendations for people who are either in UX or they've been transitioning into UX and they like the idea of heading more towards service design? Is there anything you recommend for them? Are there how do you find a service design job? Is it usually called principal service designer, or is it hidden in
Yeah,
some other title?
there seems to be lots of job um, adverts out there now for looking for service designers. Um, but I mean, because I'm currently unemployed, um, I have read quite a lot of job descriptions recently. And as someone who's probably written hundreds, um, most of those jobs, no human being could actually do. I have to say, they are 7 day a week, 12 hours a day jobs. Um, and what they think a UX person does and what they think a service designer does are very unclear. I think they're very unclear because it's not a service designer looking for a service designer to join their team. It's someone who's somebody said design thinking, service
Go find
design,
a
blah blah
service
blah.
designer.
Yeah. So I think you need to be careful about what you're looking for. But when you read the job advert, and there are a lot out there on LinkedIn, there's quite a lot of things going back and forth at the moment. If the job makes sense to you, I think that's a good sign. If you are not doing UX at all and don't have any experience, I would say jumping into service design is, unless you have you're within a very solid team that can mentor you and walk you through it, not a great place to start on your own.
Okay.
I think if you're more experienced, go for it. Go for it on your own. Find a team where you can work, whatever. I think that's great. But I think because of the complexity of some of these things, you really need to have some of that experience around how everything works and runs so that you can manage the other types of complexity that you're going to run into.
I'm going to ask you an ugly question.
Oh
So
dear. Okay.
I apologize. I only half apologize. This is sorry, not sorry. So while I'm
Okay.
talking to you, I'm looking on LinkedIn for jobs that have the title service designer to see what types of things they might ask for. I'd like to tell you about something I've just stumbled on and just get your natural reaction to it, even though I won't
Okay.
name the company or name and shame. So, I'm reading this to you with taking out the name. As a service designer, you'll be responsible for guiding government clients through design thinking processes to generate creative, practical, and effective solutions to their pressing challenges in strategy, process, technology, and service delivery. You will co-create solutions with clients to improve the success of technology implementations, blah, 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 blah. You must apply an iterative design thinking process and lens to support clients to solve complex problems in strategic planning, process improvement, technology adoption, evolution, and service delivery. And of course, it goes on to design thinking workshops, and design
Yeah.
thinking workshops. So let me ask you for your gut reaction to kind of a job description like that. What does this sound like to you? I won't ask the leading question.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, it was written by a marketing person who doesn't really understand any of those words that they're using and how they go together. So that's quite rude. I hope it's not someone I've applied for a job for. And they're
I
not
won't
listening.
say.
Um, so, and this is the problem, is that, I have, in the last couple of months, spoken to people who have no idea what a customer experience person does or a user experience person does, or why, sort of asking me, say, well, are you a researcher or are you a designer? Which one are you? I was like, I'm both. I was like, what do you mean? So ask me questions that really highlight the fact that they have no idea what this discipline does. So, and this is, so one of the things that I have noted is that very rarely in my several decade career have I had a client that was my counterpart. So, as someone coming in, as someone leading a project, or a director or a manager or whatever, and then talking to the client who is your counterpart, or is your counterpart, very rarely have they had any UX. I mean, if they have, it's very superficial. So that when you really start to understand that people who are hiring people like us don't really know what they're hiring, don't really know what any of those words mean. And then it becomes quite contentious. And what I've found in my experience is when you sort of say to people, either an organization you're working with, or, whatever the circumstance is, and you say, well, actually, that doesn't make any sense, but they've used the word innovation, they've used design thinking, they've used service design, they've used collaborative, they've used,
Co-design
they've used
workshops.
iterative, they've used workshops. It's like, let's see how many of these words we can get into one, one job description. And they really, if you can't do the job description in basically 500 words, it's probably not doable by a single person. I just, so I have had, sort of looked at lots of job descriptions and looking at them going, wow, I would, having not worked this summer, I was like, I would like to continue having a life now that I
Right.
have one. Um, and I don't, but it's, and it's always, fast pace, quick reaction to,
Well, you know what
issues and
fast-paced means. Fast-paced
chaos,
is
usually.
what?
Chaos.
That, and I believe it whispers at ageism. Like, hey, oldie dinosaur, don't try to apply here. We're fast.
Oh, okay. Well, what I would say to that is, tortoise in the hare. And, what I always say to people is like, oh, everybody thinks, it takes really long time to do UX. We're going to do it really quick. And I have to say, working in a marketing environment, it's really tough to actually get them to understand that you kind of do the research first. It's not based on opinion, and then you kind of then deliver solutions with lots of stuff in between. But the fact that you take the time to really understand the challenges that you're faced with or your customers are faced with, really think about the solutions that will work. Will those solutions actually deliver to the client and the customer? And you come up with a solution that will actually have a better outcome for everyone. Now, that bit in the beginning takes a little bit longer. But, there must be, there's decades of research out there from Forrester, Accenture, and, all of them.
Gartner.
McKinsey, Gartner, that says, if you kind of spend a little bit more time in the beginning actually understanding what you're doing, then you are not spending 90% of your time actually fixing what you've delivered. And so the idea around fast pace, and I'm glad you said that, because that always, it scares me, but it didn't scare me for the ages thing, because I probably still think I'm 12. But it scares me more about thinking about how it works, and it was like, oh, we can do guerrilla UTs and all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, you can, but guerrilla UTs aren't very good for anything that's quite complex. Right. If I'm designing a drinking bottle, yeah, it's probably great. But if I'm
just going to go to the coffee shop,
service is quite complex. Yeah, it's a little bit more difficult. So that fast-paced thing, which is actually a really good point, Deb, just says to me, you don't get it, because
speed over quality.
If you don't have to fix the mistakes, it's actually quicker. Because you're spending another year fixing all the stuff and then finding out that it's not working and you throw it away.
Right.
So, yeah. But I didn't get the ageism bit.
That's how I see it. But, that's for another thing. We've got some questions in the chat room. Elijah's here. Always happy to see him. He said that NN Group tends to define service design as designing the employee experience to figure out how to get the ship chugging smoothly so the company can better help the customer. But he also points out that, and I'll put this up on the screen, he also points out that other folks are defining it as designing any service, the product experience from branding to product interaction to customer support. Is there, again, I know we talked a little at the beginning about definition, but are all of these true? Some of these true?
So, the sort of the Nielsen Norman stuff, I get, in that but that's a very specific piece of work where you're only working with internal employees. Most of us that are designing services are, doing back office stuff, as I talked about, but also doing, stuff that's driving content, through a process, through people and, websites and landing pages and emails and congresses and all sorts of stuff. So services are very different, but it's about understanding that there are many different touch points. You're delivering some sort of service. So whether it's content or a product or I'm going to clean your house or, whatever.
You're checking into a hotel.
Checking into a hotel, and there's a service there. So there are this is why I'm sort of saying, you've got to look at a lot of stuff that actually fits what you're trying to do. But Elijah's other question was about the range of it, the expanse of it. So with the first piece of work I talked about, we actually did a lot of the case study around the proposition for doing this, because we had to present it back to the client to say, this is actually a good thing to do, because you are wasting loads of money on one commissioning, well, not actually commissioning, but allowing your vendors to just deliver stuff and with no control over whether it's actually delivering better outcomes or not. And then you have the problem with the localization. So that's the business side of it. And then you also have the problem with things that were being developed in countries weren't being brought back in to share with the other countries. So you were missing out on innovation that was happening other places, because innovation just doesn't happen at corporate headquarters. It happens lots of different places, or with your, creative marketing vendor. So there was a real business proposition around that. Now, it wasn't external, so there wasn't the marketing, although I would kind of disagree. We really had to market it to people internally. But it's not sort of like the external marketing and advertising that you have to do around it and really driving home the proposition to your customers. So there is that part of it as well. So if you're coming up with a brand new service, you would be wise to do all of the business analysis, which is also part of your own UX research. What's the problem I'm trying to solve? And is there a business here? Is there a service that we can deliver that has a valuable proposition? So that's where Elijah was talking about, kind of like in his question, he's talking about sort of like the front end of what you do with service design. Sometimes you don't have to do that, because someone says, we just need this thing to help us run this. And sometimes it's, we've got this great idea. Will it work? So there's a range there of what you do. And if you've got that front end stuff, you are then, probably collaborating with people who know more about the market and more about the business issues. And maybe you're talking to accountants about how it works and how you're going to make money. So the collaboration changes depending on where you are in that process as well.
Great, thanks. We have a question from Anupam, if I'm pronouncing that name almost correctly. And Anupam asks, as a budding UX researcher, how can I contribute to service design?
Okay, so the research bit is really the key to all of it. Because, the first thing you really kind of do as a UX person, is understand the space. So you have to understand who's involved, what are they doing, and how does it relate to other people. So when I talked about the blueprint, and you sort of have, swim lanes. So person A is doing this and this and this and this and this. Person B doesn't come in till here, but they can't do what they're doing until person C has done something over here. So it's very much like if you've done Gantt charts, it's a little bit like a Gantt chart.
Because there's dependencies.
There's dependencies. There's, what I refer to as swim lanes, because that's what my guys always called them. But you have everybody in there, but you also might have, here's all my, people, but now I also have a website that's part of this service, but it's not the service, it's part of the service. And I know that every 3 months they change something. So they change content or they deliver new content. So that's also in there. Or perhaps there's a delivery aspect, a logistics aspect of it, and things that need to happen. So it's not just people in those swim lanes. It might be something that a piece of software is delivering, or a truck, So it's everything that's interacting. So it's all the different touch points. And so as a UX person, so if you're doing things like information architectures, which can be quite complicated sometimes they're quite simple, sometimes they're very complicated. It's kind of has that kind of feeling where I'm building up a picture of what's really happening here. Now that picture could be a blueprint, or it could be in what I would call an ecosystem, where you can see where, because it's not linear, and you can see where people are sort of, or the different touch points that are happening. So you also, the way you render things is driven by the service type that you're creating. Yeah, so it could be, a process wheel of some sort, or, it could be, linear, or I guess, or it could be like a spider web, it could be like a network thing. So it can be all different types of things, but the research part is where you understand what is needed, what the challenges are, what's the motivation to use the service, what's the motivation to deliver a service for the organization, what are the barriers, what are the triggers, it was everything around that area, so that you can map it, as well as the processes that people are using. And then you will also see, when you map it, where there are issues. and then you can design for those to alleviate those issues. So
And
as a
just
researcher, you're the key thing. I was going to say, you're the key person that kind of starts it all.
And in case Anupam tuned in a little bit late, you had also said earlier that sometimes if you're a little bit newer to UX research, you're more junior, service design can be a little bit harder or trickier to just jump into unless you have a team that really has some of that mentoring and coaching built in. It's great to learn from experienced people, but be careful. Anupam, this is not the kind of thing where you can read a book or take an online course and jump into this because of the great complexities. So we need you as a budding UX researcher, but it may be something you have to maybe transition into over more time.
Yeah, I would say as part of a team. So when we were doing the bigger project that I spoke about, so the one with the stock imagery, I just did myself because it was fairly straightforward sort of process type delivery. But the one that we did with the pharma franchise, we had 3 people, kind of myself and two other people doing the research because it was just massive. We had so much research to do because there were people we needed to speak to kind of all over the world. And then people we needed to speak in headquarters who would, kind of the IT people. So it can become quite complex, but as a budding researcher, that's kind of good because your research team is probably more than one person.
Right, so there may be some learning opportunities there. We've only got a few more minutes together, so in case there's any last questions, send them in. Elisa, for the people who are listening on the audio-only version, I'm going to ask you to spell your name and to remind people where they can find you, LinkedIn, Twitter, website, however people find you.
Okay, so my name is spelled Elisa, and my surname is Del Galdo, Del. And then there's a capital Gal or uppercase Galdo. I am on LinkedIn, which is probably the best place to find me. I am on Twitter, but I basically just stalk other people on Twitter. I don't tweet very much, but you can contact me via Twitter. Yeah, so that's where you can find me.
Great. And we've got one last question that I'm going to toss up on the screen here. Someone says, there are multiple stakeholders in an ecosystem. Some of the stakeholders have their own solutions for the system. How do we ensure we don't overarch our ideas and ensure that ideas are respected? I guess it sounds like, how do we not fall for what the stakeholder says or the highest paid person's opinion?
Yeah, so this is always really tricky, and this is something that, not always someone just stepping into UX shoes can do, because firstly, it's rare that someone who is the highest paid person in the room won't listen to you. Even if you're paid more than they are, they don't necessarily listen to you. So you have to demonstrate it, through, this is the research that we did. This is not my opinion. I'm basing this on data. Yeah, so we, maybe they have a solution and you have a different solution, and you then evaluate those solutions. And you can say, well, look, we tried, but actually this one solves the problem better, or maybe it's a combination of the both or something like that. But I think that as a UX person, we thrive on data and knowledge and insight, and that you very often are dealing with stakeholders that don't necessarily feel comfortable with that, or feel more comfortable with, oh, I think it should be pink. My daughter likes pink. Should we make it pink? And that's being a bit flippant, but and then they want you to sort of make it pink and then test it and tell them that it's okay. So they do things a little bit backwards than we do. And so what you have to do, the convincing is doing it in the right process. But always listen, because sometimes they come up with great ideas, or it's an idea that gives you an idea. So that's the other part that's quite important, is that, being around other people with good ideas or interesting ideas also sparks new ideas. But it's a tricky thing. It is tricky, and if you're not the most senior person in the room, I would give it to the most senior person in the room. to do it.
Excellent. So we're going to be wrapping up. I just want to give people a couple of show notes on some shows that are coming up very soon, so you can mark your calendars. Of course, every Tuesday is Office Hours, Ask Me Anything. I go live for an hour at 6:30 p.m. Italy time, adjust for where you are. And I just take questions live for an hour. All questions are welcome. Wednesday, September 30, our live podcast is going to be Chatbots and Conversational UX with Susan Hura. I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce her last name, and everybody's friend Chinu. We're going to be talking about that next week. Monday, I'm going to be doing a live lesson, no guests, and I'm calling it Actionable Meaningful Personas, and talk a little bit about how to make them. Tuesday, October 6th, Office Hours, Ask Me Anything. Wednesday, October 7th, the twice rescheduled podcast, I hope it happens, on finding your life purpose. Because people ask me all the time, should I be working in UX? And I say, I don't know, but hopefully this podcast will get you closer to the answer. After that, Monday the 12th, I'm going to be doing my slides that I just wrote this weekend on what is the value of education and certificates, because I have some opinions that may surprise you, as in I am actually for some things that some of you think I'm against. Just because I don't like boot camps doesn't mean I'm against education. Tuesday the 13th, Office Hours, Ask Me Anything. Wednesday the 14th, Machine Learning and AI with David Knickerbocker. I am so excited. He's going to tell you there's no such thing as AI. Say what? Let's see. Monday the 19th, Michelle Ronson is back for a 400th time. We love her. And she's going to talk about proper UX research terminology, which means stop messing it up, me and everyone else. Tuesday the 20th, Office Hours, Ask Me Anything. Wednesday the 21st, Joel Barr is back. Oh my God, people love him. I think he's got the most popular video on our channel of 2020. So, second most popular, Don's video on ageism. So Joel is going to be talking about combating common reasons that people use to try to skimp on or cut research. So it is Research Week, Monday the 19th. And that is it for show notes and upcoming shows. Don't forget to usability test the subscribe button on YouTube and empathize with the like button. We are coming up on 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel, and I have been threatening that on for the 1,000 subscriber celebration, I will be introducing my boyfriend. So hopefully that makes you want to subscribe rather than unsubscribe, but that will just be a humorous, fun, wacky 1,000 subscriber celebration. So on that note, Elisa, thank you so much for being a repeat guest, and everyone in the chat is saying thank you, very appreciated, great shows, great info. We are fans.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, and see you next time we come up with a topic. Everybody be well, and I hope to see you tomorrow for Office Hours. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.